Gittin Daf the test continues the Gemara's discussion about what happens when somebody is makdish his eved. We'll discuss what is the status of that eved as far as two things. First of all, what was the intent of makdish? What happens to the eved? We'll have three options. Does he go free? And makdish means he becomes part of Am Kadosh. Is it that the owner owes his value to hektish because he was makdish the value that eved could fetch on the market? Or is there another possibility that the eved himself becomes a piece of hektish? That's all one discussion. What happens to him halachically? What is the status? We'll also talk about a whole separate cheshbon. That's if he goes free, does he require a get shichur? Does he go free only from his owner, or does he actually lose the status of an eved and all the isurim attached? Or does he require a get shichur and now he has to be changed as far as his iser status as well? So let's focus on the first discussion. It's a machlokes we had said in the last episode, machlokes between Rabbah and Rav Yosef. What Rav said, if somebody is makdish his eved, according to Rabbah, if he's makdish the eved, he goes free. And what he meant to say is that the eved becomes part of Am Kadosh. According to Rav Yosef, that's not true. It doesn't clearly say what Rav Yosef holds, but the implication is that he holds that the value of the eved is given to hektish. Hektish owns the use, the value of the eved itself. Now, it cannot mean, according to everybody, it cannot mean that the eved himself becomes hektish, because the body of the eved can't become hektish. That means kiddush aguf would be a carbon, and eved can't be a carbon. And he also can't be used for bedek habayis, which is construction of the Beis Hamikdash, because an eved is not construction material. So we have this machlokes. What happens? What is the meaning of hektish? So the Gemara wants to bring a proof. The Gemara's first proof that we're going to see on this daf, we'll start at the last two lines on daf Amud Ches. The Rebbe says somebody is makdish his eved, the eved is allowed to work and he's allowed to eat because his work has not become hektish. That is, you may think that the eved's work, his ma'aseh daim, anything that he profits belongs to hektish, and therefore were the eved to eat from his own work, he would be using hektish value. So the Brisa says it's not true. Now, the Brisa continues and says because the only hektish that he has is his value. The value is what was hukdash. That means his work doesn't belong to hektish, his body doesn't belong to hektish, his value is owed. So this clearly shows against Rabbah. Rabbah said that he goes free. Here he's clearly not going free. Hektish is owning the value of him. So it's not like Rabbah. So the Gemara says this is different. This is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and our entire discussion was the opinion of the Rabbanan. What Rabbi Meir and what Rabbanan? So it's discussing what happens when somebody says something that doesn't make sense. Do we try to interpret it as best we can in something that makes sense? Do we assume somebody said something that has to make sense somehow? The discussion is referring to somebody who says in Erechin, he vows an Erech of a baby who's less than a month old. Now, a baby who's less than a month old does not have an Erech. An Erech is specifically defined in the Torah. So the Rabbanan say it's meaningless. He vowed an erech that doesn't exist. Rabbi Meir says he has to have meant something, and he probably meant the value on the open eved market. That's what he meant. Now, therefore, Rabbi Meir says we always interpret it in the most logical way that it could mean, and the one that fits in his wording the best, and we're willing to go away from his wording as long as to make it make sense. And therefore here we'll assume in the case of somebody who's makdish his eved, even Rabbah would be there, Rabbi Meir would hold that the eved is hukdish l'damav, because that is the simplest understanding of makdish and eved. Now, according to the Rabbanan, though, that we don't do that. We don't go and give this explanation to what he said. We'll go with the simplest explanation of what he said, and he said that he's makdish it. So makdish means that it becomes a kadosh, and therefore we'll say that it becomes kadosh. It is less interpretive, less adding into it than what Rabbi Meir is willing to do. So we're in the Rabbanan, we're willing to do that. But Rabbi Meir, he would go with that it's hukdish l'damav. Now it says where this has to be the case. This has to be that this is Rabbi Meir. Let's look at the next line in the Brisa. It says if somebody is makdish himself, then he also is allowed to work and eat, and he was not makdish, he doesn't belong to hektish, and his work doesn't belong to hektish. And again, because he's makdish l'damav, he's only makdish his value to hektish. Now, a person doesn't have a value in a slave market. A free man, a ben chorah, doesn't have a value on the slave market. So if we're going to say that this is going against Rabbah's explanation, and what it means when somebody's makdish his eved is that he's makdish his value, that's the automatic interpretation, so then here it wouldn't make sense. The guy doesn't have a value to be makdish to hektish. There is no valuation of him. The only way that this makes sense is if this is Rabbi Meir, and we're reinterpreting what he said in the nearest possible way that we can make sense, and we mean to say that if he would have had a slave, if he would have had a value on the Eved market, that is the amount of money that he's makdish to hektish. Only Rabbi Meir would hold that way. The Rabbanan wouldn't hold that way. It's crucial to understand the difference between Rabbi Meir and what Rabbah is saying. Rabbah is saying that there is an existing value, and he's makdish that, and hektish now owns it. And that's not what Rabbi Meir is saying. Rabbi Meir is saying that he is making a vow of a certain amount of money, which is based on that price that he would fetch on the Eved market, and that is not the simplest explanation of what he's saying, but it's what we interpret into his words. Says the Gemara now, next step, let's say there's machlokes between Rabbah and Rav Yosef as to whether or not when somebody is makdish is Eved, if he becomes Kadesh, he belongs to Hektish, at least for his value. Let's say that's a machlokes tonight. We have a brayso that says if somebody's makdish in Eved, there is a machlokes whether or not there is an Isser Me'ilah. If somebody uses that Eved, does he violate the Isser of using Hektish? According to the Tanakama, there is no Isser Me'ilah, and there is an Isser Me'ilah. So it seems to be, says the machlokes is, were you makdish him, does he belong to Hektish or not? Which is the machlokes between Rabbah and Rav Yosef. Now, Rosh Gamliel didn't say that he has Me'ilah fully, so there's Me'ilah on his hair. The Gemara will explain in the next discussion, that'll work out as to why. Anyway, it says the Gemara, if that would be the machlokes, that this machlokes is the machlokes Rabbah and Rav Yosef, then they should be discussing whether or not he's Hektish. It was not what they say, they discuss whether or not there's Me'ilah. So therefore, what's happening here is that everybody agrees that he becomes Hektish, like Rav Yosef. The only machlokes is there an Isser Me'ilah on an Eved which belongs to Hektish? We know that on land, there is no Isser Me'ilah, Xeris HaKasav. And we also know that there's a linkage between Avadim and land. And therefore, the machlokes is, does the linkage go so far as to say that an Eved has the halacha of land, that there's no Isser Me'ilah if somebody uses an Eved which belongs to Hektish? So Gemara tweaks this. The Gemara says, if that would be true, then the Isser Me'ilah should be on the body of the Eved. Why is it on the hair? So obviously, everybody agrees that there is an Isser that there is no Isser Me'ilah on an Eved, just like there is no Isser on land. The question is, does hair count as land? Anything which is meant to be cut off, is that count as if it's already detached and therefore it's no longer considered to be land? It's not part of the Eved anymore? Or do we say, no, as long as it's still attached, it's still part of it, and therefore there's no Isser Me'ilah on there at all at this point? So okay, I'll accept that. You're saying that machlokes is whether or not the hair which is going to be cut is considered to be cut or not, and therefore does it have the question, does it have the halacha of the Eved himself, which is like land? You know what, there's another machlokes hanayim between Rameir and the Chachamim. Maybe that machlokes is the same as this machlokes. What's that machlokes? Discussing swearing on a claim against you that you owe somebody land. The halacha is that you don't swear on land. So we have a Mishnah that says that Rabbi Meir says there are some things which have a halacha of land, but not really like land. The Chachamim disagree. What's the case? Somebody, if Reuven claims to Shimon, you owe me 10 grapevines. I gave them to you, you have to give them back to me. And he admits to 5. So the halacha is anytime you admit to partial claim, you have to swear a shvur d'oraisa, but that wouldn't be true on land. Now these grapevines were fully loaded. They're full of fruits. So Rabbi Meir says he has to swear. The Chachamim say you don't have to swear. What's the machlokes about? So Rabbi Yossi said it's on the grapes which are fully loaded and they're meant to be picked off. Rabbi Meir says they're considered to be picked and therefore they are not considered to be land and you could swear on them. The Rabbanan say they're not considered to be picked and therefore they are considered land and you can't swear on them. And this is the same machlokes is are these things which are going to be cut off considered to be cut off already? Says no, this is not a comparison. Rabbi Meir may only say here in this case that it's like it's going to be picked, but he would agree in the case of the hair that it's not like it's going to be picked. What's the reason? Because here they're getting worse. They are becoming the grapes past the point of ripeness and they start getting ruined the longer they stay on there. So they have to be picked off. But hair continues to grow and to improve as long as they stay on. There's no reason Rabbi Meir would say that it's not necessarily true. That is, that Rabbi Meir would say there as well that hair has as if it was just cut off already. Okay, the Gemara now moves on to say what happened with this halacha, which we've seen Rabbah and Rav Yosef discussing. It's all in the name of Rav. So according to Rabbah, Rav had said that somebody who's makdish his Eved goes free. Rav also said he requires to get shechur to take off his Isser, the halachic status of being an Eved. It's not just, he becomes free, he's not owned, he doesn't have to work for anyone, but he still has the halacha of an Eved, which means it's awesome to marry a Bas Yisrael Bas Chayrin. Now, and requires to get shechur to free that. The Gemara notes that Rav Yochanan holds the same way. Ula quoted Rav Yochanan holds the same way. The Gemara has two versions of a discussion as to somebody who came in and reported Rav's halacha to Rav Yochanan, two opposite versions as to what his reaction is. So it was Rav Chia bar Yosef who went and he told him, according to the first version, Rav Yochanan expressed surprise that Rav holds that way. The Gemara asks, why is he expressing surprise? He himself holds that way. The Gemara explains he was surprised that Rav holds like him. He was pleased but surprised. When the second version, he expressed surprise that Rav didn't say that it requires a get shechur. He hadn't heard, he perhaps interrupted before, or he didn't hear that Rav agrees that he needs a get shechur to take off the Isser Avdos, and he expressed surprise that Rav doesn't hold of that, and then he explained that no, Rav actually holds of that as well. The Gemara discusses more deeply this halacha that we require a get shechur. Again, the issue is even if the Eved goes free, he still has the halachic status of an Eved. He's only a partial Yisrael. He only has chiyuv mitzvahs like an Isha, and he can't marry a Bas Chayrin until he can take that halachic status off. So the Gemara quotes a brisa, which may seem to challenge this, and the Gemara resolves it. So the brisa discusses a ger who has no inheritors, because he's as if he's born anew when he converts, but he owned avadim. So when he dies, his property will become hefker, and anybody can take them. He has no inheritors. So if he owned avadim, so if he had avadim who are adults, they kind of themselves first. So for the minute, they're the first ones to grab themselves. Obviously, they're the first ones that are nearest to themselves. So from the minute their owner, the ger, dies, they go free. Now about children, here you have machlokes. Tanakama says they are kind of themselves. The Abba Shaul says they are not. Instead, they are available for anybody to take. The first owner takes them, owns them, and they cannot be kind of themselves. The Gemara will discuss that issue more in depth later. The Gemara's question now is, in this situation, who's going to write the get shechur? Who's going to free them? Who's going to take off the halacha of an Eved? If they require a get shechur to take off the halacha of Eved, who's going to take them off? So this was the question that was asked. So Rav Nachman said that this is not a problem because the death of the owner takes off the Isser. And there's a connection between a get shechur and a get isha. Just like by a get isha, she requires a get in order to take off her halachic status of being usher to anybody else to marry. But if her husband dies, that ends. The same thing applies if an Eved's master dies, his status of avdus goes off. So the Gemara says that's true. So then even if it's not a ger, a regular Yisrael who dies, the Eved should become not an Eved any longer. Someone says, no, this is exeris the custom that you can inherit an Eved. It says, you pass an Eved along in inheritance. That's why as long as there's an inheritor, it continues. But here you have no inheritor, so he goes free. So one says, what happens if somebody is mafkir his Eved and then he dies? Now there's no inheritor, and there isn't anyone to inherit him. You should say the same thing, that the Eved should go free. So the Gemara says, perhaps we do. The Gemara says, but we have a quote of a Meimar, who says somebody who's mafkir his Eved and he dies, that Eved can't be fixed. Why doesn't he just go free? Why does he need to get a shechur? So the Gemara says that statement of a Meimar is a bit hard to understand. The Gemara now wants to know is halacha like Abba Shaul, the avadim who are ketanim, that their master, the ger, died, are they cunning themselves or not? Do they have a yad? Do they have the ability to be cunning themselves even though they're children or not? So the Gemara has opposing halachos here. The Gemara has two opposite quotes, and the Gemara will challenge, Rav Zera will challenge both of them. Did you really hear this explicitly, or did you try to learn it out of a specific incident that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi quotes Rabbi Yehuda Nasi? And then the Gemara will show you could be medayik either way from that story. So if you're medayik from that story, you don't have a proof. The Gemara will go through both ways you could have learned. So the first version of this is that Rabbi Yaakov Be'idi said that the halacha is like Abba Shaul, that the children remain hefker, they're not kind of, the ketanim avadim are not kind of themselves. And the second version is Rav Chibar Abba Kohen Rav Yochanan, that they are kind of themselves. And in each one, Rabbi Zera challenged him and said, are you learning it out of this story because I could prove you otherwise? And they each said, no, we're not learning it out of the story. We heard it explicitly. Now, what's the story? So the story is, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said in front of Rebbe, somebody says, Nisi ashti mi pleni avdi, that is, I gave up hope on my Eved, meaning saying it was a mafkir, the Eved, so that Eved is now ownerless. What is the halacha of that Eved? How do you take off the status of Isser? And Rebbe had answered, the only way is with a shtar. You have to have a contract. You have to have a get shechur. Now, the question over there is why? And over there said, because you learn from a get isha, you have a xeris of la a hekesh to get isha, just like an isha has to have her isser removed with a shtar, with a get, and Eved also can only have his isser removed with a get. And therefore, we're comparing the removal of the isser of an Eved to the removal of the isser of an isha. And now you have two versions of being medayik, whether this could apply to a katan or not. So the first version, to say that it applies to to say that it does not apply to a katan is to say, just like an isha, you're only taking off isser. You're not taking off any monetary status. It could also only apply to a situation where the Eved no longer has any Isser involved. He only no longer has any monetary status to be resolved. He only has Isser involved. The only situation like that is a Eved who is a Gadol, who takes over ownership of himself when he becomes Hefker. And the only issue that's involved is the Isser. So that's the only situation. So therefore, that's the situation where you could learn out of Isha. That's the one that is similar to Isha. And that would be the proof that the child obviously has to be kind himself. So, and we would hold like Abba Shaul that he is not able to be kind himself. He cannot learn from Isha to a child. So the Gemara says the way to move back the other way, and this is the second edict that we make on the other version. This is how we want to pass in halacha. And we'll say, no, you can't prove that way because you could always answer the first way. The other way is to say that you could compare it to Isha as follows. Just like in Isha, she's set free by the get, whether she's a gedol or katan, whether she's an adult or a child. Either way, even in Isha, a child still receives a get. So for an evidence to work the same way, and that would be the proof against Abba Shaul that it could work, you need to have the get shechor, and that hefker works even on a child. And again, we would say not necessarily, because you could always learn the other way. Like we explained before, it only applies to a gadol that has no monetary issues to be resolved, only Isser issues. Okay, the Gemara continues its discussion of how you take off the Isser. The Gemara just quoted Rebbe, who seems to say that the only way to get the status of Isser Eved off of someone is with a get shecher, is with a shtar. Somebody asks, there's a brisa where Rebbe says he could also redeem himself. If the Eved gives money, he could redeem himself, and then he is not only set free, but also becomes a full-fledged Yisrael and has no Isser Avdus. So the Gemara says, yeah, Rebbe holds that way generally, but here, Rebbe was talking about a situation where he was Hefker. The master was Mafker him. If the master is Mafker him, then you can no longer redeem himself. There's no one to redeem himself from. There's no one who owns him. And therefore, the only situation you could use to resolve this is a shtar. And this is to argue with a different Tana, which is Rabbi Shimon. If a brisa goes Rabbi Shimon, who says the name of Rabbi Akiva, that there is no way to take off the Isser by redeeming oneself. You must receive a get shecher. When does he learn that? He learns from the pasuk discussing a shefcha charufa, a shefcha who is half freed and half not freed. She has a partial redemption, and she's a korban asham if she has bia with a eved ivri. And over there, in discussing the entire thing, it says v'hafter if she wasn't redeemed, she wasn't fully redeemed, she was partially redeemed. The entire sugi there, the pasuk ends off and it says loichu pasa, that she did not have a shtar, did not have a get shecher to set her free, and therefore that concludes the issue, says Rabbi Shimon, to show that the only way you could really take off fully the Isser Avdos is with a shtar, is with a get shecher. But money, redemption, is never going to take that fully off. The Gemara now discusses, is the halacha like Rabbi Shimon or not? The Gemara has a lot of names here. The Gemara calls Rabbi Chaman and Rabbi Nachman, says the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Chaman and Rabbi Yechon says the halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara says Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak found Rav Bar Sheilta, who was sitting on the gate of the shul. He says that this is halacha like Rabbi Shimon or not. He said, I say it is not like Rabbi Shimon, and the Rabbanon come from Achuza say that Rabbi Zeir says in Rabbi Nachman that it is like Rabbi Shimon. And when I came to Surah, I found Rabbi Bar Avin, and he said to him, tell me exactly the story, why are you paskening this way? So he said, this is what happened. There was an Amma, there was a maidservant whose owner was very sick, and he was going to die. So she came and she cried before him, and she said, how long is that woman, meaning herself, going to continue being a servant? Meaning she was asking him to free her before he died. So he took his hat and he threw it on her, and he said, be kind of yourself with his hat. So what he said, it sounded like he was trying to do a kinyan chalipin. So the case that came before of Nachman was she said free or not, and he said nothing was accomplished, she was not set free. So the people who saw thought that the reason was because Allah is not like Rabbi Shimon. You cannot set somebody free by redeeming themselves. So the Gemara says that's not the pshat. The pshat is that he was trying to do chalipin, he was trying to do chalipin wrong. The way we do chalipin is you do an exchange. Reuven gives something to Shimon, in exchange, Shimon transfers ownership of something he owns to Reuven, but the ownership transfers by means of the object that Reuven gives Shimon. There's an opinion that goes the other way. Reuven gives something to Shimon, and that transfers Reuven's ownership of something else to Shimon. Meaning that the mystery transfer, does it happen by an object moving the other way or an object moving the same way? We pass against the other way. Here was the same way. He gave her his hat, and he said, when you clean up my hat, you clean up yourself. So we were saying that does not work. And it has nothing to do with whether you hold like Rav Shimon, that money could theoretically work to set in Eved free or not. Now, the Gemara says further of Shmuel bar Achisa, the name of Menuna Saba, the name of Yitzchak bar Ashana, the name of Rav Huna, the name of Rav Hamnuna, the halacha is like Rav Shimon. And the Gemara concludes it's not true. The halacha is not like Rav Shimon.